Karen the Warp Spinster here. Welcome to my channel and thank you for joining me today. Always glad to have people drop by to do some exploring on quilts. Last week I talked about perhaps doing this week's video on a MishMash quilt, or what is sometimes called an orphan block quilt. And I discovered, well, I know that I had given away those quilts that I had made, and also discovered that I had no photos of them, but I do have one that's in process, so we will use that, as well as a photo on my iPad of when I was putting these blocks up onto my design wall downstairs, and then took a photo of it because I knew other things had to go up on the design wall before I was going to get to putting it together. And that was, gosh, I don't know how long ago, and here I still am. So because the lighting is so bad downstairs, where my design wall is, and it's just really awkward to film and not very good for you to watch if I am filming in the living room on the floor. I am going to use that photo at some point. I'm going to switch over to the iPad with the photo so that you can see where I'm going with it, and what I think it will help me to explain it better to you, how I go about doing this. Other people may do it differently. I co-taught a class with Michael, and he does it a little bit differently, but pretty much the same. You have to take the same things into consideration no matter how you do it. So this is my stack of blocks from various demonstrations that I have done, or classes, or leftover from quilts, and they're all Christmas winter themed fabrics in here. Once in a while they'll creep in just a general green or red. And I have this many. I knew I had some already, but when Moto came out with their, what did they call them? Not flourish, was it flourishes? Might have been flourishes. Anyway, it was 12 months of tins that you got with fabric in them and instructions for a quilt. So I taught sort of, not really a class, but I did presentations every month where I talked about if there was an error in the pattern, or if I did it differently. Sometimes I would do, if you want to do a smaller version, you can do this. If you're doing a larger version, this would be the conversion. And then I also, as a bonus, designed a quilt block that, and usually a quilt, always a quilt, come to think of it, using a technique or a unit that was used in the original flourishes. Flourishes doesn't sound right. Someone will remember it for me. So because I knew that in the end I wanted to make a quilt out of what I had done for demos, I decided to always do them in Christmas fabrics. So I have already met one of the criteria that I will talk about, which is cohesion and unity. But I will also talk about how you can work to achieve that in a quilt, even if you have a real mishmash of blocks. So the first thing that I do when I have a stack of blocks is to sort them. And I generally sort by size. You may, and especially in this case where I know I've got the cohesion, the unity already, because I've got the same color scheme going on. I find it easier to do it by size because, as you'll see when I lay it out, sometimes I need a smaller one, sometimes I need a larger one. And these are all different kinds of quilts, or blocks. So some of them were just units from that I was demonstrating on how to do something for the demos for flourishes. Pardon me, Moda, if I've got that name wrong. And some are just kind of left over from other things that I did. So I started to do a quilt from some machine embroidery that I did, and I love this so much, but I knew there really wasn't any way I was going to do a whole quilt with all of that where I was in my life. So I'm going to include that in this quilt as well as all the other pieces. So I do have a great variety of size, and I usually start out sorting by size. And the smaller ones, you could either call them really small ones, or they could be fillers. This is often what I use to fill in spaces when the block sizes are not the same. So I have all sorts of them. I have tiny square squares. I have hourglass, and just sort of different units that I didn't put into a block but could be used for fillers. And I have a lot of these because some quilt I made had lots of half square triangles, and I made, I guess, quarter square triangles, hourglass, whatever you want to call that. So I have a lot of those. This will also help with the unity. So unity is trying to somehow tie all of these blocks together so that they look like they belong together. And having repeats of some of these smaller blocks will help with that, in addition to me having the same color scheme here. Here is one of my own designs that this was my practice piece when I was digitizing an embroidery design. And goodness knows, I think I was demonstrating probably, I don't know, I'm guessing the flying geese sections. This was one of, I have a lot of these that were the two different sizes. So this is the smaller one of all of these that I demoed for the quilts that were in those kits. And then I have the larger sizes from that. Here's a Dresden plate that isn't on a base yet, but that's not a big deal. Don't know where that was from. That wasn't from the demos. And then just various quilts from the demo. Here's a, oh, what was the name of this? Shoot, can't remember, but it's another quilt that I taught a class on. So I had those from the demo. Then I have more stuff here and more stuff there. And I'll put up a picture of more red and green fabric that I have. So apparently I plan to make a really big mishmash quilt. So this is what I'm dealing with. A lot of different sizes of blocks that I am going to sort into sizes. So I'll have the larger blocks. These are 12-inch. Mostly 12-inch is the largest I'm going to have, but a couple of blocks that are bigger, like this, is going to turn out to be, this was done with the hex ruler, and those will turn out to be larger, and that Dresden plate is going to be larger. All right, and then we'll talk about fillers a little more. So first thing I do is sort them. I'm getting distracted, aren't I? So I will sort them by size, but you don't want to sit here and watch me do that. Oops, runaway blocks, aisle 2. All right, so now I am going to bring in my iPad and get that set up. The lighting will be different, so I will be back when I have that. I am now sitting down and can't see what's on screen, so I am going to endeavor to hold this right here because I know all of this is on screen. So this is how I began to lay out the blocks down on my design wall. Pardon the uneven light. This is why I'm not filming this down there, doing it in person. So you can see I have different sizes of blocks here. So I've done my sorting on the blocks so that I can just grab from a pile if I see, oh, I need a large one, oh, I need a small one. The main thing that I'm doing here is, well, one of the main things. There are going to be a lot of main things. All right, one of the main things, especially when I'm laying it out, is to have balance. And that is going to be balance in color, might be balance in value. So I've got darks and lights. You'll see that many of my backgrounds are a cream sort of color, but some of them are a pure white or close to white. So I want to try to spread that around so that I don't have all of the blocks with white up here and all of the ones with cream down here. Unless that's an effect that you're looking for, but generally I'm not, because I want to try to unify everything and make it look like one cohesive whole. So I'm going to start out probably with, say, a larger block in the corner, and then maybe put out some other large blocks, space them around, just so I get, again, some of that balance where I've got the large spaced around, and then I can balance it out with smaller ones in between. And that's also handy because you're going to need to fill in spaces between those large blocks. So I probably, I don't know, laid that one out. That's a 12-inch. And then did another one next to it. And I didn't want them all touching, so I put down a couple more here and another one there. So I spaced some of those out. Actually, I've got quite a few in here. Here's another large one. I've got a couple more down here. So that once I've done that, then I can sort of see where I need to fill in. And that's then, of course, where I start using the smaller blocks, or just individual units that I could piece into a strip or a block. And that's where, am I doing this right on top of the photo? Yes, I am. Sorry, while I back this out. Let me add one and then lock that one. Okay, so now that I have those laid out, I can start to fill in with some smaller blocks. So here we've got some 6-inch ones from my demos, and I can start to put those in. Now, when I am doing blocks of the same size, I may, in fact, I think in all cases, almost all cases here, I have butted them up against each other in some fashion. Now, it may only be halfway, it may only be a quarter. Sometimes it will be completely. But that helps to pull things together so it doesn't look so much like I've done big block here, surround with little blocks. So, and I do the same thing with the 6-inch block. So I start adding all of those in, and then I'm going to need the fillers. And the fillers are going to be the spaces that really need just something quite small. Now I have other options for what I can fill in here, but ultimately I am going to end up with these small spaces. So I can either create a strip of something in there, say, I don't know, a checkerboard or half-square triangles or something, or I can use plain strips. I'd like to lay out as much as I can before I start deciding the color or what I want to do with those plain strips, because again, I want balance, so I want those to be, if I'm doing plain strips, for example, then I want to have those spread out around throughout the quilt. So here I've got, say, these small blocks that I'm using as fillers. So these half-square triangles I put into a single unit there. And then here's some more down here. And where do I have some more here? Here are some little blossom kind of blocks. And here's another one. There were a lot of half-square triangles in the kits, in the patterns in the kits. So I have quite a few half-square triangle kinds of things and flying geese. So that again also adds to some of the balance. If I had some of those, but maybe not so much, when I'm doing smaller blocks or fillers, then I might repeat that particular pattern to bring it all together to help to unify it. And unity is the second main aspect that I look at, so that if I'm doing these small fillers and they're just plain strips, that helps to pull it together, so that if I've got, say, if I opt for all, I don't know, stripes, you know me, stripes, then I would want to make sure that a number of these filler spaces are done with stripes, and that will help to pull it all together. I don't want to put a stripe here and something else here and something else here, because I really need something to pull it all together. It's less important perhaps in a quilt like this where I already have a color theme going on. But if you're pulling together very disparate blocks with different fabrics, then it's nice to have these filler spaces to sort of unify them all, to pull them all together. And honestly, it's mostly just laying out the blocks and moving them around and filling in spaces. Then you have to pay attention to how you're going to put this together. So I like to do it in sections. When I'm doing a mishmash quilt, I do not want, blank this out, I do not want all of my blocks with just one long seam all the way down the quilt or all the way across it. Row by row quilts are wonderful. I love them. That's not what I want to do. So I want to break it up into sections that I can still sew. So maybe I've got blocks like this with a filler, and I can put that section together and have a straight seam. And then maybe I want this one to go like this, so I don't have to match up the seam there. But at some point, I'm going to have to be able to put in the next row. So all I'm doing is just thinking as I'm laying these out, where do I have a section and how could I sew it together? Now, say I have next, no, I don't want to do that because now I'm starting to get a row all the way across. So let's say I decide I want to do something like this, have a couple of blocks up there. Then I've got this to deal with. So I might say do this, and then I've got a way to piece this together, although I do not want these, and they probably will not be because I have such a variety of size, that these will not form such a visual line. If I have 12-inch blocks and they're all going like this, then it's going to look like a row quilt or a column quilt, vertical row quilt. And that's not what I want. So I'm always going to be looking, how am I going to put this together without it looking like it has all of those lines? So let's bring this back. And so if I start looking here, now this is not necessarily the final layout. I haven't gone through and checked for all the sections, but there isn't, the only sort of visual lines that I'm getting are like right here and one right here, but they aren't the complete length of the quilt. Down here, I've broken up this line, and so I have to pay attention to how am I going to put this section together or add it onto the whole when I've got this jog here. So then I have to work out how is this section going to work. So maybe this is going to have to be a section here, whatever I put down there. And then I can start to piece the whole thing together. This may be a problem down here when I do that. So that's the other thing that I'm doing. Finally, when I'm putting this together, if I check the balance and how everything's going, then I can decide, that will help me decide where the fillers have to be, because I want to make a seam. Now I can do partial seams. It's not a big deal, but I like to just make it easy for myself. So right here, these are not quite the same size. So I'm going to need a small filler strip in here, which is actually going to be larger than you think, because of course I've got that seam there. So there's probably a plain filler strip because that's pretty narrow. And then I'll have another one over here and one down here, so that they start to get distributed. Now this one, I have a choice of doing either that or that. This is a wide enough bit I can probably do say half square triangles or a checkerboard. I don't have any checkerboards. Oh, there's a checkerboard. I know I've got checkerboards in the pile. This is just the beginning of this quilt. It's going to be much larger. So I think you can see what I'm talking about here. So this is a section here, except that that is going to interrupt that section. So I can either change that to something else where I have a block here, or I can figure out another way to put that together. So maybe I'm going to do this as a strip, and then this as a section. And then I have that piece in there to worry about. So that's all I'm doing, is going through and making sure that I have sections that I can put together so I don't have a row all the way down or all the way across. And then I'll just start putting those sections together. All right, that is for this particular, oh, fillers. Let's talk a little bit about fillers. So as I was looking at this quilt, and I do, if you remember, I have that embroidered piece to put in. Let me find that here. Pardon me. Goodness knows where that went. I love that block so much. Here it is. All right, so I have this block. I'm peering up to see if you're seeing it, which I really love. This is the only embroidery block that I have in here so far. So I decided, well, what if for one of these fillers, I decided, what if I want to, pardon the lack of pressing, design a strip that is also embroidered. So I was testing out with this one. I apparently didn't have stabilizer under here. It will look better with stabilizer. But then I could cut this strip and use it as a filler, which starts to tie in with that embroidered block. Or you could just use plain. I mean, if you don't have an embroidery machine, there's no problem. Or you could do, say, this narrow strip. If you have decorative stitches on your machine, even if it's not an embroidery machine, then you could do a decorative stitch down there to add a little more interest. If your quilt has a lot going on, as parts of this do, then filler strips may be the best thing to give the eye a little rest. This one has, because some of the blocks have pretty large empty spaces, I'm not so concerned about maybe adding more detail into those filler strips because I've already got some eye rest places here. In fact, this some of these don't necessarily even look like a block. They're not a traditional block. I think that's one I designed that works better when you put it together with other blocks. But it was left over, so I'm putting it in here. So that's just something you can think about. If you have a lot of blocks that are large, say this one, if you've got a lot like these with fewer of the really detailed ones, then I think it would be nice to add a little bit of interest by doing some filler blocks that are embroidered or stitched or something. And of course, you could always do hand stitching if you're a hand embroiderer. Always can do applique for something if you want to, so lots of choices. This is something that it's very hard to describe and explain to people. I hope that I've given you an idea of what you want to think about as you're laying these out. The best way to learn actually is to just start doing it. And if you want to start differently than I do, if you want to work on just one section at a time and get a feel for how that's going to look, say this is going to be a section here, and get that in order, and then put together another section, say this is another section. I guess maybe that's another section in this case. Then you can put sections together, but then as you are laying out those sections, then you can shift them a little bit so you're not getting those lines all the way across. So this one, for example, I could piece this section and this section. These sections aren't meeting up here. I'm going to shift this down a little bit so I don't get that straight line effect. So I'm trying to minimize the visual full lines in either direction. Of course, you could do some things on point, which in this case, say I put this on point in the center, then that could be a focal point. I would have to add in, of course, the triangles on the side in order to do that. But then I would have a really large focal point block in the middle. In this case, the Dresden plate, the large Dresden plate that I have might be a focal point, and then these are filling in around. And in that case, I might slap up the focal point block, the largest block, in the center of the design wall, and then start building around it. And then, of course, you will have the line around it, but just treat that as a section and work around that. Whichever way works better for how your brain works. If this is your first one, I suspect this method is going to be better for you, where you piece it section by section. And if you don't have a design wall, this is a really good way to do it too, because you won't be able to lay this all out ahead of time and move things around as you're laying it out. But still, as you are doing sections, try to be aware that you're going to treat these as kind of mini quilts. So you still want to have the contrast and a balance. In my case, of course, I've got the white versus the cream color, which is what my eye sees first. I have a pretty good distribution of red and green just naturally because of the way the blocks are designed. But I'm heavy on red down here, so I might want to balance it out make sure that I have some greens around it so that the eye doesn't zing in on all of that red down there. And just keep that in mind as you're doing the sections. Try to balance those out so that it looks more balanced than when you start putting those sections together. So I hope that was helpful. I know it's kind of, I don't know, seems confusing, and that's why you really just have to dive in and start to do it. And if you start to do this and you have questions, please put the question in the comment section. If you don't want to do it publicly, then you can go to my Facebook page, which again is Warped Spinster, and leave a message for me there as you're starting to put it together, or on Instagram. I'd love to see what you all are putting together, or what you're starting with even. And I will do my best to answer your questions and give you some thoughts. I have questions on my Facebook page fairly often, more so when I was teaching in person. People would say, how about this fabric? And I would do this. So that is how the basics of it with the color scheme already done. What about what I have from all of the explorations we've been doing? That is up next. We're back with more mishmash. Now, in my explorations, I'm still, let me zoom out here a little bit, I am still fairly solidly into the brights realm. And that may well be true for you as well, that you have a specific sort of style or fabrics that you like. Maybe you like more traditional Civil War or reproduction fabrics. It will work no matter what. And if you have a preferred style or type of fabric, say batiks or something, then you'll probably already have some of that unity and cohesion built in because of the fabrics that you use for your style of quilting. So we have here quite a mishmash. Now, just a disclaimer here that Many of these are destined for a different quilt. So when I'm talking about things here, do not expect to see them put together into a quilt, because these may well be their own quilts, smaller quilts. Not all of the things that I have done are here because they've gone into other quilts on their own. And some of them are definitely destined for that. The Alice Wonders quilt, for example. And these are in the works to be in quilts, but I'm using them here just as an example. So, and not every block that I make or piece that I make is meant to go into a quilt. I don't go into these explorations to make a quilt. I'm just exploring ideas, and maybe I will like it enough that I will continue it and complete a quilt later on. But I'm just exploring on this channel. So we have, and this is a pretty small space to be doing this, but again, I'm looking for balance and unity. And balance includes color, size, maybe even direction for something. So these could end up being filler strips, or they could end up being a section on their own. Not sure where this came from, but here's a filler. And here are larger blocks that I will have to work out how I want to put these together, because they are not square. So do I want to do this kind of thing with the blocks and then at some point square it up with some filler kind of stuff? Or do I want, now there's no way I can square these up unless I chop things off, and then that just defeats the whole purpose of the block. So fillers take on a whole new meaning if you've got wonky stuff. Now, color balance, a lot of what I do is white with bright colors because I prefer that. Sometimes it's going to be black with it, and of course there are often stripes. But in this case, I've got some gray. So I will probably want to spread out these blocks that have gray so that it balances out. And even if I decide, all right, I want all of these sort of wonky log cabin things to be in the same section, then I'm going to balance it, at least for my eye. It might not be balanced for your eye, so you would do it differently. But I probably would not put those together and then this here, because that makes a visual section, and I would rather it look a little more balanced and mishmashy. So I might put it down here. If I want it to look to be closer together, then I might do that to get a different pattern for that section. Now, in this case, I have one block that has the black and white stripes, and that's the only one. So maybe I want to fill in something up here. Can't see it up there. That has a black and white stripe that will start to pull everything together. And that black and white stripe might be my unifying piece. Although, of course, they're all brights. So that's not necessarily a really critical thing for pulling it all together. But I do want to make sure that that's balanced so that I don't have all of the stripes up here and all of the white down here or whatever. And again, with these black and white and red that I have, do I want them all in one place or do I want them distributed? And I think I probably want them distributed. Red is a color that's really going to draw your eye. So in order to have it move around the quilt, I would probably opt to spread it around the quilt. In this case, they're going into their own quilts, so that doesn't matter as much. But And here's another piece that it's got black and white, but not the stripe. Maybe I want to do something that has a lot of black somewhere else in the quilt so that it all puts it together. So I want the eye to move around rather than zooming in on a really specific visual line that's very prominent. And I also want to balance the color and the size of the blocks. Now, in some cases, this one, which turned out to not do what I wanted it to do, so I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do with this piece, if anything. I mean, I learned some things from it, and I like it, but I still haven't decided what I'm going to do with it. This is not really the same style as these, so I would probably opt to not include this in the quilt. If I had a lot of ones that are quite different from this, so it was evenly split, then I would figure out a way to balance this out, move these different pieces. This one's not so bright. Move those pieces around the quilt so that the eye moves with it. In this case, it's really the only one that isn't bright and black and white, so it will probably go its own way, whatever that way may or may not be. Here I've got a dust bunny, which is pretty sad considering I just did this last week, right? And it's, quite different from the black and white and red, but if I spread them around, see if I can zoom out more, you can see my messier desk, then it's going to draw the eye, and it's going to look like they really were meant to be together because I've got one up there and one down here. And then I can fill in with some others that really pull it together. See what else I've got here. I think I've done most of them. Here I've got a circle that I would I was doing another circle on top of these, right? But if I decided, I don't really want to do that, I could applique this onto something and just use it as another block. And again, this has a lot of white space. So if this was the end point of this block, not sure it is, probably isn't, but if it were, this is a lot of white space and background. This is a lot of white space and background. So this will go in a different part of the quilt so that it balances out this block. I don't know. I think that's, in fillers you can do much the same thing as I did with the Christmas quilt. You could do, if you're doing this modern style like I am here, I would do fillers like this. They might need to be narrower or smaller. And I have a piece here somewhere that was smaller. And these half square triangles I could complete to make a block to make my life easier, or not, because what fun is it if it's easy, right? Gotta try new things. Now here's a shorter one. So I might do filler blocks with this. With some of the crumbs that I have, I can start just to put in pieces to fill in around, and goodness knows I have enough crumbs. So I hope that helps. Again, if you have questions, please let me know. I will do my best to answer them. I don't know, I've just found it difficult to describe this. It really just needs to be done. You just have to sit down and try to do it and figure it out. And you may use a completely different method and process than I do. And that's great. In which case, please share that, because we're all learning from each other. All right, that is it for that. I think I have a couple of updates here for us. Here, of course, are some other pieces. I didn't exactly forget about them, but I did include them with this. Again, because they are brights with black and white, I can bring these in at any point. They are probably going to be their own quilt. We know the knit and purl is going to be. at some point. I'm really excited about those. I like that a lot. And I like these a lot too. So I have some other things in the works, but the problem is I get to exploring things and then, oh, that's a new thing I want to do. And some of the other stuff is put on a back burner, but maybe that will be my quiltolution for next year I don't really make New Year's resolutions, but maybe I can endeavor to do better with that. One announcement, I do have a new camera mounting system, and I got what I thought was the last piece today, but it looks like I'm going to need another adapter. This is like putting the puzzle together. Probably harder than putting these together. So I will be working on that, and hopefully things will be a little more steady and sturdy. I also am working on my glyphs quilt, which looks like this. And I'm using Bella Solids from Moda. I couldn't readily find the colors that I really wanted. It's difficult to translate something from Procreate where I've got unlimited color palette and it's bright and shiny, and then I have to try to translate it to fabric. And I'm happy with what I have, but the color doesn't match exactly what is in the design. So here's kind of the process, how I get started with it to do the templates. And I'm using the applique-piecing method that I learned in a class with Sheila Frampton Cooper. It's a very good class if you have a chance to take it. It's an excellent one. I've got some more pieces put together, and I have another one ready to do the sewing on. So then the sections will start to come together, which will be exciting. I had 2 quilts accepted into shows this past week, which was very exciting. I'm a little bit floored, but I'm very excited. One of them is for the Modern Quilt Guild QuiltCon conference in February in Atlanta, and they accepted Pretty in Pink for that. And then SACWA, the Studio Art Quilt Associates, has accepted my unhinged quilt in their virtual exhibit, Historical Detail. So that's very exciting. It means that, if I want to keep entering quilts, I'm going to have to keep making quilts, which is fine, cool, a lot of fun, love to do that. So I am putting quite a bit of energy into doing this. I have not been quilting for a while because of my shoulder issues. I went to the doctor, and it's rotator cuff, which is, not thrilling to me, but it's not a major tear. It's inflamed in small tears, so we're dealing with that. But until that's in order, I just don't want to further inflame it by using it too much. But I will be getting back to quilting the bungee quilt, and then I have a whole lineup of quilts for my long arm when I am ready to do that. I think that, I did want to show you, this is completely unrelated, and you can scroll forward if you want to, but I use this temporary glue based for this particular process. And so from watching my junk journal videos, which is kind of my guilty pleasure, I don't know why it's guilty, but and because these have such fine tips on them, they're easily clogged even if you use the cap that comes with them. So you stick a pin in it, but that's no fun, and junk journalers like all kinds of embellishment and stuff. So they make these dangles that they add on to the pins. So I made a dangle for my glue bottles, which I think is kind of fun. I really do like embellishments, in spite of what my quilts might tell you. I do like a lot of funky, bright, beady things. on some things, not my quilts, unless I'm doing crazy quilting, but that's just an aside, neither here nor there. Sorry about the digression. Now, I think that's going to be it for this week. Again, if you have questions or you have a different way of doing things, please add those into the comments. I always enjoy hearing from you. I feel like I'm making friends out in the world. So I appreciate you being here. Thanks again for joining me, and I will see you next week, I hope. I don't know. I just don't know what I'm going to do. We'll see what comes to mind before then. I lied. That wasn't it. I forgot to mention that if you have blocks that are quite different, not the same style of fabrics or whatever, I have put a quilt together with those kinds of blocks, and in order to help to unify it, I dyed it in my washing machine with tan RIT dye. And that sort of, I don't know, it unifies it because you've got that sort of overlay transparency of tan that helps to pull everything together. So in a pinch, you can give that a try. Now, be well, be safe, be happy, be quilting. Peace out.